February 14th, 1943. 9:12 a.m. Rabaul Airfield, New Britain. Heat shimmers above the crushed coral runway. The humid air smells of fuel oil and salt carried inland from Simpson Harbor. You can hear the metallic clatter of tools against engine cowlings and the rising whine of Nakajima sake engines turning over in warm-up cycles. Radio static cracks through a field handset resting on a wooden crate beside a parked Mitsubishi A6M3 model 22-0. Captain Hiroshi Takahashi of the 204th Naval Air Group stands with his hands behind his back, watching a pair of mechanics wipe sweat from their brows as they secure the cowling on Petty Officer First Class Kenji Watanabe's Zero. The rising sun flashes off the Zero's smooth, elegant wings. Slim, purposeful, deadly. A young lieutenant jogs across the field flight cap, tucked under his arm. Captain Takahashi, he calls, stopping just short of the propeller arc. Intelligence reports a new American fighter operating from Guadalcanal. Takahashi does not turn immediately. His eyes remain on the Zero's narrow landing gear, delicate but familiar. "We have seen their Grumman F4Fs, he says calmly. Heavy, slow, clumsy on the climb. "This one is different, sir," the lieutenant insists. Long nose, bent wings. At that, Takahashi finally looks at him. Bent wings. A faint smile touches his face. Perhaps their engineers have begun designing aircraft while intoxicated. A few nearby pilots laugh. The humor is easy, comfortable, earned. Across the Pacific, American aircraft have fallen in flames to the Zeros of Rabaul. The Imperial Japanese Navy Air Service has ruled these skies since the early months of the war. Their pilots are veterans of China, their training long unforgiving elite. They believe in the superiority of maneuverability over brute force. On the far edge of the field, a reconnaissance photograph lies pinned to a board inside a bamboo operations hut. The image is grainy but clear enough. A bulky American fighter with inverted gull wings and a long shark-like nose sits on Henderson Field. The Vought F4U Corsair. Lieutenant Commander Masao Ito studies the photograph through wire-rimmed glasses. "Look at the landing gear," Ito mutters to Commander Saburo Sakai, who leans against the doorway. So tall, so narrow at the base. Sakai folds his arms. "If it even lands," he replies. With a nose that long, the pilot must see nothing but sky. They both know what that means. Carrier operations demand visibility, precision, stability. An aircraft that cannot reliably land on a carrier deck is an aircraft chained to land bases. Limited, predictable. Outside, the rising engine noise builds as Watanabe pushes his throttle forward. The Zero rolls smoothly, lightly lifting off the coral strip in less than 100 meters. It climbs gracefully into the blue Pacific sky. That is how air superiority feels, you realize. Effortless. Later that afternoon, word spreads through the ready room. An American fighter attempted carrier qualification aboard USS Saratoga. It bounced hard. Nose pitched. Propeller struck deck. Another veered dangerously on approach. One reportedly flipped. The laughter returns. Perhaps the Americans should attach wheels to their bombers instead. One pilot jokes. Sakai listens quietly. He has seen enough war to distrust laughter, but even he cannot ignore the early reports. The Corsair's long nose blocks forward visibility during landing approaches. Its powerful Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine produces torque that can swing the aircraft violently left if mishandled. Carrier decks are unforgiving. Steel and ocean leave no room for design arrogance. In the operations hut, Commander Ito traces a finger over the reconnaissance image. "They built it for speed," he says. "Too much engine. Too much weight." "Speed does not win a dogfight," Takahashi replies. Turning does. Outside, the tropical sky glows white with heat. Zeros practice tight, horizontal turns above the field, carving perfect circles against the clouds. The Corsair intelligence suggests is fast in a straight line, heavy in the roll, poor at low speed, unsuited for the art of maneuver combat. As evening approaches, a Mitsubishi G4M. Betty bomber taxis into position escorted by a pair of Zeros. The pilots brief their interception plan for expected American resistance over the Solomon Islands. Confidence fills the room. The Zero remains unmatched in close combat. Their doctrine demands drawing enemies into turning engagements. Force them to circle, Takahashi instructs. They will bleed speed, then finish them. He does not mention the Corsair again. That night, beneath dim lantern light, Petty Officer Watanabe writes in his journal. He sketches the odd American silhouette from memory. The bent wings fascinate him. He writes, "Too large, too heavy, too proud. In the darkness beyond Rabaul." American mechanics work under floodlights on Henderson Field. Lieutenant Ira Kepford of Marine Fighting Squadron 5, MF-124, runs his hand along the cowling of his F4U Corsair. The massive propeller blades gleam in the light. He has heard the complaints, the broken carrier attempts, the deck accidents. But he has also seen the airspeed indicator needle climb past 400 miles per hour in a dive. He has felt the 8 Browning .50 caliber machine guns vibrate through the wings as they fire in unison. He says nothing. He straps in. Back at Rabaul, the Imperial pilots sleep with certainty. They believe they understand the machine. They believe they understand the enemy. They believe the sky still belongs to them. The bent wings are a joke, a curiosity, a failed experiment. The Pacific air hangs heavy and still as if waiting. February 16th, 1943. 6:40 a.m. over the Solomon Sea northeast of Guadalcanal. The morning air is cooler at altitude, thin and sharp against the canopy glass. Lieutenant Ira Kepford of VMF 100 Pound 24 pushes his Pratt & Whitney R 2800. Double Wasp forward, feeling the surge of 2,000 horsepower pull his F4U Corsair upward through scattered cloud. The aircraft trembles slightly in the climb, the long nose pointed at a pale horizon streaked with rising sun. Behind him, Captain John Smith leads a 4-aircraft division. Radio chatter hums through the SCR 522 set mounted behind Kepford's seat. Blue 2, tighten up. Keep your spacing, Smith orders. Below them, the Solomon Sea rolls in endless dark blue. Far to the northwest, faint specks rise against the light. Zeros. At Rabaul, Captain Hiroshi Takahashi had dispatched a patrol at first light. Petty Officer Kenji Watanabe leads the element, his Mitsubishi A6M3, slicing cleanly through the sky. He spots the American formation first. Enemy fighters. 10 o'clock high, he reports calmly. Watanabe banks left, initiating a shallow climb to meet them. He expects the usual. Wildcats attempting to gain altitude, struggling to turn tightly enough to escape. But as the range closes, he sees something different. Long nose, bent wings. The Corsair. He grins inside his oxygen mask. American experiment, he mutters. The formations merge. You can hear it before you see it. The deep thunder of the double Wasp engines contrasts with the sharper whine of the Sakai. The Corsairs dive slightly, gaining speed. Kepford feels the acceleration press him into his seat. Watanabe pulls into a climbing turn, inviting the engagement into a horizontal circle. He expects the American to follow. Instead, Kepford does not turn. He pushes the nose down and dives past the Zero in a blur of dark blue. The airspeed indicator surges past 380 miles per hour. The Corsair shudders slightly as compressibility begins to whisper at the edges of control. "Don't turn with them." Smith's voice crackles over the radio. "Use your speed." Watanabe snaps his head around, surprised. The American did not accept the invitation. The Zero continues its turn, but the Corsair is already extending away, climbing again with raw power. The second pass is faster. Kepford rolls inverted and drops from above, lining up the Zero in his reflector sight. The 8 Browning, A&M 2.50 caliber machine guns ignite. The wings vibrate as tracers streak forward. Watanabe jerks hard left. The Zero responds instantly, light and agile. The rounds pass behind him. He tightens the turn, trying to force the Corsair into a circle. But the Corsair climbs out again. From above, Captain Smith watches the pattern forming. Dive. Fire. Climb. Refuse the turn. He smiles slightly. On the third pass, another Zero attempts to follow a Corsair into a shallow dive. The Japanese pilot pushes his aircraft harder than usual, chasing speed. The Zero begins to shudder at higher velocity, control surfaces stiffening. The Corsair keeps accelerating. The American aircraft's thick wings and robust construction hold steady as the speed climbs past 400 miles per hour. The Zero cannot match it. Watanabe sees it clearly now. The Corsair is not trying to dance. It is hunting. He calls over the radio. Do not pursue and dive. Regain altitude. But one of his wingmen does not break off quickly enough. Kepford reverses direction in a high-speed climb, rolls over the top, and drops back down with terrifying momentum. The 8 machine guns flash again. The Zero erupts in flame fuel, igniting along the wing route. It spirals downward toward the sea. For a moment, there is silence on both radios. At Rabaul that afternoon, Takahashi listens to the combat report. 1 aircraft lost. No confirmed American losses. Pilot error, he says evenly. He followed too steeply. Lieutenant Commander Masao Ito nods. The Corsair relies on speed. Without altitude, it is nothing. The assumption feels safe. Yet over the next week, similar reports arrive. Corsairs refuse turning engagements. They climb faster than expected. They dive away beyond safe pursuit range. When they fire, the concentrated weight of 8 heavy machine guns tears through lightly built Zeros with brutal efficiency. Petty Officer Watanabe sits in the ready room days later, replaying the engagement in his mind. He sketches the attack pattern on a chalkboard. They do not circle, he explains to younger pilots. They strike from above, then disappear. A lieutenant frowns. Then we climb higher. We try. Watanabe replies quietly. But their engine power? He does not finish the sentence. Across the sea, American mechanics adjust the Corsair's canopy framing and refine landing approaches at Henderson Field. Carrier qualification remains troubled. The long nose still blocks forward visibility on final approach. The aircraft still bounces if mishandled, but on land those weaknesses matter less. In the air, its strengths grow clearer each day. At Rabaul, Takahashi reviews maintenance logs and intelligence summaries. He notes the increasing number of Corsairs operating from Guadalcanal. He notes their preference for altitude. He circles a line in red pencil maximum speed, approximately 400 miles per hour. He taps the paper. No aircraft can maintain such speed in combat, he says. Yet somewhere above the Solomon Sea, a Corsair dives again, engine roaring, wings steady, 8 guns aligned. The early warnings are present. Visible. Documented. But confidence has weight. And weight is difficult to lift once it settles. March 3rd, 1943. 11:18 a.m. Above the Bismarck Sea northwest of Lai. Cloud cover hangs broken and uneven sunlight piercing through white towers of vapor. Below, Japanese transport ships and destroyer escorts churn through dark water in tight formation, carrying reinforcements toward New Guinea. Anti-aircraft gunners stand ready beside Type 96 25mm cannons bolted to steel decks. In the cockpit of his Mitsubishi A6M3 Model 22, Captain Hiroshi Takahashi scans the southern horizon. He leads a high-cover element assigned to protect the convoy. Sweat trickles down his spine despite the altitude chill. Report, he orders over the radio. Clear above. Scattered cloud. No contacts, replies Petty Officer Kenji Watanabe from his right. For weeks they have studied the new American fighter. Reports describe speed, vertical tactics, refusal to turn. Takahashi has adjusted his briefings accordingly. Force them low, he instructed before takeoff. Cut their altitude. Without height, their advantage fades. The convoy below leaves long white wakes across the sea. It is a powerful sight. Organized. Determined. Reinforcements that will shift the ground war. Then Watanabe stiffens in his harness. High 12 o'clock, he says sharply. Multiple aircraft. Diving. You can see them now. Dark shapes falling from the sun wings bent in that unmistakable inverted gull pattern. The Vought F4U Corsair. Lieutenant Ira Kepford leads the 1st Division. His altimeter unwinds rapidly as he pushes into the dive. The double Wasp engine roars at full military power, propeller blades biting the air. The aircraft remains stable even as speed surges past 420 miles per hour. Below him, the Japanese formation begins to break. Takahashi rolls hard left, climbing to intercept. He intends to meet them before they reach the bombers forming behind. But the Corsairs are not alone. Behind, Kepford Douglas, SBD, Dauntless dive bombers, and North American B-25 Mitchells approach at lower altitude. The Corsairs are here to clear the sky. Engage, Takahashi commands. The merge is violent. A Corsair flashes past Watanabe at impossible speed. The American does not hesitate or turn. He fires in a brief, devastating burst that slices through the wing of a trailing Zero. Aluminum fragments scatter into the slipstream. Watanabe yanks into a tight climbing spiral, expecting the Corsair to follow. It does not. Instead, Kepford pulls into a steep climb using excess horsepower to regain altitude. Within seconds, he is above the engagement again. From that vantage point, the pattern becomes clear. Dive, strike, climb, reset. Takahashi attempts to counter. He climbs aggressively, engine straining. The Zero responds with elegance at medium speed, but as he pushes higher, he feels the familiar limitation. The Sakai engine does not provide the same raw thrust. The climb angle shallows. A Corsair rolls inverted above him. For the first time, Takahashi feels a flicker of uncertainty. The American drops directly toward him, nose-steady guns blazing. The 8 Browning machine guns create a dense stream of tracer fire. Takahashi jerks into a hard brake. The Zero shudders but obeys. The rounds pass just behind his tail. He attempts to pull the Corsair into a horizontal fight. The American refuses. Instead, the Corsair extends away in a shallow dive, outpacing pursuit. Takahashi pushes his throttle fully forward. The Zero vibrates at high speed. Control stiffens. He cannot close the distance. Below, explosions erupt along the convoy. B-25 Mitchells skim low across the water, strafing decks with .50 caliber fire. A transport erupts in smoke. Watanabe spots a Corsair climbing away after a firing pass. Determined, he commits to a pursuit climb. He pulls steeply upward, engine temperature rising. The Corsair continues climbing. At 20,000 feet, Watanabe's rate of climb begins to fade. The Corsair still rises. The American rolls over at the top of the arc and dives back down. Watanabe has no altitude left to trade. The burst catches his right wing root. The Zero lurches violently. Smoke fills the cockpit. He forces the canopy open and bails out, tumbling into the sky as his aircraft spins toward the sea. From above, Kepford watches the parachute blossom. He feels no triumph, only confirmation. The Corsair is no longer experimental. It is a weapon. On the Japanese flagship below, officers observe the air battle through binoculars. They see Zeros struggling to keep pace with diving Corsairs. They see American fighters dictate the vertical plane. Why do they not turn? One officer demands. Because they do not need to, another answers quietly. By late afternoon, the convoy burns in scattered columns of smoke. Air cover failed to hold dominance. Back at Rabaul that evening, Takahashi removes his flight gloves slowly. His expression is controlled, but his voice carries tension. They choose when to engage, he tells Commander Masao Ito. We cannot force them. Ito studies the casualty list. They are fast, he admits. Faster than anticipated. Outside, the tropical dusk settles over the airfield. Mechanics refuel remaining Zeros. Fewer return than departed. The laughter about bent wings has faded. The first contact with the unexpected has carved a new shape into the war above the Pacific. And the sky feels different now. March 28, 1943. 4:55 p.m. Kahili. Airfield Bougainville. The late afternoon sun burns low and red over the runway, casting long shadows across rows of Mitsubishi A6M3 and the newer Kawanishi N1K1. Shiden fighters recently ferried in for evaluation. Mechanics work quickly, tightening cowling fasteners and checking ammunition belts, feeding into twin 7.7mm machine guns and 220mm Type 99 cannons. Inside the operations hut, a large map of the Northern Solomons dominates the wall. Colored pins mark recent air engagements. The red pins marking losses have begun to cluster uncomfortably. Captain Hiroshi Takahashi stands rigid beside the table. Across from him, Commander Saburo Sakai leans forward, one hand pressed against the wood. They refuse to fight properly, Sakai says, voice calm but edged. They dive, fire, and climb. They do not commit. Takahashi nods once. Then we will deny them altitude. He turns to the gathered pilots. Tomorrow we launch high sweep patrols at 25,000 feet. We intercept before they descend. Force engagement at our chosen height. A younger lieutenant hesitates. Sir, their climb rate appears superior, above 20,000 feet. A pause. Then we climb sooner. Takahashi replies, we position above their expected approach routes. The decision settles over the room. Confidence, though thinner, now still stands. The Zero has ruled the Pacific since 1941. A single American design cannot overturn doctrine forged in China and proven over Pearl Harbor and the Dutch East Indies. Dawn breaks humid and hazy. March 29th, 1943. 8:07 a.m. above Empress Augusta Bay. The Japanese high cover formation already circles at altitude engines, running hot from the long climb. Takahashi scans the sky through thin cloud layers. Hold position, he orders. Minutes stretch, then faint contrails appear far above them, higher than expected. Lieutenant Ira Kepford and his Corsair squadron have climbed to 30,000 feet before crossing Bougainville. The R-2800 engines maintain power where thinner air begins to sap the Zero's performance. The Corsairs form into two elements, sunlight glinting off their dark blue fuselages. Bandits below, Kepford reports calmly. He feels the advantage immediately. They are already above the interceptors. Takahashi squints upward. The silhouettes materialize against the sun. They are higher, he says quietly. The Corsairs tip forward, almost in unison. You can hear the dive begin. The rising scream of airflow across thick wings. The deep thunder of the double Wasp at full throttle. The airspeed indicators spin upward as gravity joins horsepower. Takahashi pulls into a defensive spiral, trying to disrupt their firing angles. Zeros scatter, breaking formation. Kepford selects a target. He squeezes the trigger. 8 Browning machine guns erupt again, synchronized streams converging on a climbing Zero. The impact is immediate. The Japanese fighter shatters mid-air fragments trailing smoke. Another Corsair flashes through the formation, then climbs almost vertically. The Zero pilots attempt to follow, but their rate of climb falters as speed bleeds away. Do not chase, Sakai shouts over the radio. Too late. One lieutenant commits to pursuit, anger overtaking discipline. He pushes his A6M3 upward, engine temperature climbing. The Corsair continues rising, then rolls over into a hammerhead maneuver, dropping directly behind him. The burst is short and precise. The Zero falls away, trailing flame. Within minutes, the engagement becomes chaotic. Zeros attempt tight horizontal turns to lure the Americans. The Corsairs refuse. They slash through at speed, each pass deliberate and calculated. From the ground, anti-aircraft batteries fire uselessly at high-altitude streaks. Takahashi realizes the trap too late. By choosing to climb early and hold altitude, he has committed his pilots to a prolonged high-power state. Fuel consumption rises sharply. Engine wear increases. When the Corsairs disengage briefly and reset for another dive, the Zeros lack both speed and reserve fuel to pursue or reposition effectively. Break south. Takahashi orders finally. Regroup. The Corsairs do not follow far. They have achieved their purpose. They have demonstrated control. Back at Kahili that afternoon, silence fills the debriefing room. Casualty reports are read aloud. Commander Sakai studies the chalkboard diagrams drawn by intelligence officers. He traces the vertical arcs of Corsair attacks. They fight in the vertical plane, he says. We continue to think horizontally. Takahashi clenches his jaw. We adapt, he insists. We develop new tactics. We introduce the Shiden fighters, more firepower. But adaptation requires time. Training. Replacement pilots. Japan's industrial output cannot match the American factories now producing Corsairs in growing numbers. Nor can their pilot training program, shortened by wartime necessity, replicate the pre-war rigor that forged veterans like Sakai. That evening, mechanics inspect bullet holes punched cleanly through surviving Zeros. The .50 caliber rounds have entered through wing roots and exited through fuel tanks. The lightweight construction that once granted agility now proves fragile under concentrated fire. In a dim barracks room, a young pilot whispers to another. "They are faster in every direction," he says. "Not in a turn," the other replies automatically. But neither sounds convinced. Across the sea at Henderson Field, Corsairs line the runway as maintenance crews adjust flaps and inspect landing gear. Engineers have begun refining approach techniques to mitigate the nose visibility problem. Pilots learn to execute curved carrier-style approaches, even from land bases. Each day the aircraft grows more familiar, more lethal. At Bougainville, Takahashi stands alone outside the operations hut as darkness falls. He watches the sky fade from red to indigo. He understands now that this is no isolated anomaly. The Corsair is not an accident of design. It is a machine built for a different kind of war in the sky, and the escalation has only begun. April 7th, 1943. 10:02 a.m. over the Russell Islands, Central Solomons. The sky is a hard-polished blue visibility stretching for miles in every direction. At 24,000 feet, the air is cold enough to frost the edges of cockpit glass. Condensation curls inside oxygen masks as pilots breathe steadily through rubber hoses. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai leads a composite formation of Mitsubishi, a 6 M30s and several newly arrived Kawanishi N1K-1 Shiden fighters. The Shiden, heavier and more heavily armed, with 4 Type 99 20mm cannons, represents an attempt to counter American firepower. Its Homare engine offers more power than the aging Sakai. "We hold altitude." Sakai orders. "No unnecessary dives. Conserve fuel." Below, a formation of Japanese G4M. Betty bombers approaches Guadalcanal, escorted carefully. The objective is simple. Strike Henderson Field. Prove that control of the sky remains contested. Sakai knows the Corsairs will come. He hears them before he sees them. The distant rumble grows into a rolling thunder that vibrates through the canopy frame. Multiple Pratt and Whitney R, 2 800 engines. More than before. To the southeast, dark blue shapes rise from a higher cloud layer. Not 4, not 8, more than 20. Lieutenant Ira Kepford flies at the front of a reinforced Corsair sweep. The aircraft have been arriving, steadily ferried across the Pacific in crates and assembled under tropical sun. Improvements in pilot training and tactical coordination have followed. Stay in pairs, maintain altitude advantage. Kepford instructs over the SCR-522 radio. You feel it now. The shift. The Corsairs are no longer experimental deployments. They are a mass. Sakai tightens his grip on the stick. He signals for the Shiden fighters to position centrally within the formation, using their heavier armament to discourage frontal passes. The merge happens fast. Corsairs dive in coordinated elements, each pair targeting a specific segment of the Japanese formation. The discipline is unmistakable. One aircraft fires, the wingman covers, then both climb together. A Shiden attempts to meet a diving Corsair head-on. Cannons flash. The air fills with tracer lines crossing in violent geometry. The Corsair flashes through smoke, trailing briefly from its wingtip, but remains intact. The Shiden shudders under return fire. A burst of .50 caliber rounds punches through the cockpit canopy. The aircraft pitches downward abruptly. Sakai pulls into a tight climbing turn, trying to draw one of the Americans into his circle. A Corsair briefly aligns behind him, then suddenly disengages, rolling upward instead of committing. They will not be baited. Another Corsair dives through the bomber escort, raking a 0 from nose to tail. The 8 Brownings create a solid stream of impact points. The 0 disintegrates in mid-air, wing shearing away. Below, the Betty bombers begin defensive maneuvers, but without firm air superiority above them, their formation wavers. Maintain altitude. Sakai commands again, but altitude is slipping. Each time a Corsair climbs after a firing pass, it regains position above the Japanese formation. The Americans are dictating not just engagement style, but vertical space itself. Fuel gauges begin to drop. The prolonged high power state eats into reserves. Sakai glances at his fuel indicator. Marginal. He calculates quickly. Continue fighting and risk forced landing over water. Break off and concede the airspace. Below, he sees a Corsair dive past a Betty and shred its left engine in seconds. Flame blossoms along the wing. The bomber formation fragments. For the first time, Sakai feels it fully. This is no longer a matter of adjusting tactics. The Americans have built an aircraft that erases previous assumptions. Its speed prevents interception on equal terms. Its climb restores altitude faster than Japanese fighters can match. Its concentrated firepower destroys lightly built aircraft in a single pass. A Shiden attempts to pursue a climbing Corsair aggressively. The heavier Japanese fighter has more power than the Zero, but it still cannot match the sustained vertical acceleration. The Corsair rolls over at the apex and drops back down with lethal precision. The Shiden explodes under concentrated fire. Disengage, Sakai orders at last. The word tastes bitter. Zeros and remaining Shiden fighters break south, descending to conserve fuel and escape the vertical trap. The Corsairs pursue only briefly, then regroup above the bomber wreckage. Below, burning Betty bombers fall toward the sea in smoking arcs. Back at Kahili Airfield that afternoon, the debriefing room is silent, except for the scratching of pencils on casualty forms. Sakai removes his gloves slowly. "They will not fight our war," he says quietly to Captain Takahashi. Takahashi nods once. His face is rigid. "We must force them into defensive posture," he insists. "How?" Sakai asks. There is no immediate answer. Outside, mechanics unload replacement parts from crates marked with shrinking inventory numbers. Fuel reserves are tighter. Replacement pilots arrive with fewer flight hours than those lost. Across the Pacific, American factories continue producing Corsairs in increasing numbers. Modifications improve cockpit visibility. Training refines carrier approach techniques. The early landing problems that once fueled ridicule are steadily addressed. In the sky over the Solomons, the balance has shifted. The turning point is not a single battle. It is a realization unfolding in fragments of smoke and falling aluminum. But no official communique admits it. April 18th, 1943. 6:52 a.m. Buin Airstrip, southern Bougainville. Low clouds press heavy over the jungle, canopy. Moisture clinging to every surface. The runway is damp from overnight rain. Coral dust darkened to a gritty paste. Engines cough and ignite in staggered sequence as Mitsubishi A-6M30s warm at dispersal points carved into the tree line. Inside the command hut, a field telephone rings sharply. Commander Saburo Sakai answers. A staff officer's voice crackles through static. American reconnaissance reports increased fighter presence over Guadalcanal. Intelligence suggests sustained high-altitude sweeps daily. Sakai closes his eyes briefly. Numbers, he asks. Unknown. Estimated more than 30 aircraft. 30. Weeks ago, that number would have sounded exaggerated. Now it feels plausible. Outside, Captain Hiroshi Takahashi strides toward his aircraft, pulling on leather gloves. Replacement pilots stand nearby, young faces tense. Many have fewer than 200 flight hours. They listen carefully as Takahashi speaks. "Do not engage alone," he says firmly. "Stay with your leader. Avoid prolonged climbs above 25,000 feet. Force low-altitude encounters if possible." A young ensign raises his hand slightly. "Sir, if they refuse." Takahashi meets his eyes, then survive. The order hangs in the humid air. By mid-morning, the clouds begin to break. April 18th, 1943. 9:34 a.m. above the southern Solomons. Corsairs cruise in layered formation, sunlight reflecting off their dark blue wings. Lieutenant Ira Kepford checks his fuel flow, then scans the sky below. The radio crackles, bandits climbing from Buin. Multiple contacts. Kepford adjusts throttle smoothly. The R-2800 responds with deep, confident power. Element 1, hold altitude. Element 2, prepare to dive. Below, Zeros climb through patchy cloud, trying to reach intercept position before the Americans can descend on friendly reconnaissance aircraft operating nearby. Sakai leads the front element. He feels the engine strain as he pushes for altitude. The Zero climbs well at moderate speed, but the higher he goes, the more the performance tapers. Suddenly, the cloud above fractures. Corsairs drop through. The first pass is devastating. A young ensign in Sakai's formation barely registers the approaching shape before tracer fire tears across his fuselage. The Zero breaks apart instantly. "Break! Break!" Sakai shouts. The sky erupts into chaos. Zeros scatter in defensive spirals. Corsairs slash through in disciplined pairs. The Americans maintain altitude separation, always climbing back above after each firing pass. 1-0 attempts a desperate head-on approach. The pilot fires his 20mm cannons, but the Corsair's 8.50 caliber guns answer with overwhelming density. The Zero explodes in a flash of debris. Fuel gauges tick downward rapidly as Japanese pilots remain at high power, trying to counter repeated dives. On the ground at Buin, anti-aircraft crews watch faint specks twisting high overhead. They fire sporadically, but the altitude and speed make targeting futile. In the air, Sakai pulls into a maximum effort turn, attempting to protect a trailing wingman. For a moment, he nearly achieves a firing solution on a climbing Corsair. He squeezes the trigger. His cannons flash. The Corsair jinks slightly, then continues upward. Its engine does not falter. Sakai realizes something chilling. Even when they score minor hits, the American aircraft absorbs punishment more effectively than the lightly constructed Zero. "Regroup south," he orders, finally. But regrouping proves difficult. The Corsairs cut through attempts to reform, isolating individual aircraft and eliminating them one by one. Within 20 minutes, the sky belongs to the Americans. Sakai leads the survivors downward through cloud-breaking contact. Back at Buin, the landing pattern is grim. Aircraft return with bullet holes punched cleanly through wings and fuselages. Several do not return at all. Inside the operations hut, tension boils. "We must disperse airfields," one staff officer argues. "They target us whenever we climb." "Disperse where another demands." Fuel is limited. Replacement parts are limited. Takahashi listens as the voices rise. "Then we conserve," he says at last. "We avoid unnecessary engagements." Avoid. The word would have been unthinkable months earlier. Across the sea, Kepford lands at Henderson Field, in a curved approach, banking slightly to improve forward visibility past the long nose. The technique has been refined through repetition. The once notorious landing issues have diminished. Mechanics swarm his aircraft, checking ammunition belts and inspecting control surfaces. "How'd she handle?" one asks. Kepford removes his helmet. "Like she owns the sky," he replies simply. At Buin that evening, Sakai sits alone on a wooden crate helmet resting beside him. He watches the jungle darken into night. The shock has settled into something heavier. Confusion, frustration, a recognition that the tactical formulas of the past no longer apply. You can feel it in the silence across the airfield. The laughter about bent wings is gone. In its place stands a growing understanding that the war in the sky has changed shape, and desperate decisions are beginning to follow. May 5th, 1943. 3:21 p.m. Rabaul Airfield, New Britain. The airfield trembles under the distant rumble of explosions. Black columns of smoke rise beyond Simpson Harbor, where fuel depots burn from a morning air raid. Coral dust swirls violently as aircraft taxi in urgent succession, some damaged, some barely intact. Inside the main operations bunker, heat and tension press against the concrete walls. A large wall map of the Solomon Islands is covered with grease pencil markings. The red arcs that once represented confident Japanese air patrol coverage have been erased and redrawn so many times that the paper beneath shows through. Captain Hiroshi Takahashi stands rigid before the table. Commander Saburo Sakai sits opposite him, helmet resting on his knee. "They no longer respond defensively," Sakai says. "They initiate every engagement." A junior staff officer points at the map. Corsair sweeps at dawn. Midday escort missions. Afternoon patrols. They maintain continuous altitude coverage. Continuous. That word hangs heavy. The original plan, conceived in the early months of the Pacific War, relied on aggressive interception and decisive dogfights. Japanese fighters would rise to meet intruders, outmaneuver them in close combat, and secure the sky for bombers and convoys. But the Corsair does not cooperate with that script. Loss reports? Takahashi asks. 8 zeros this week. 2 Shiden fighters. Pilot casualties significant. Fuel shipments have been delayed by submarine attacks. Replacement aircraft arrive slower than losses accumulate. Pilot training programs compressed by wartime demand produce aviators who lack the instinctive experience of veterans lost over Guadalcanal and Bougainville. Outside, mechanics push a zero with shredded control surfaces into a maintenance bay. The aluminum skin is pierced repeatedly along the wing route. Each hole is clean, round, precise. 8 heavy machine guns firing in disciplined bursts. Across the Pacific, American factories in Connecticut and Texas produce Corsairs at increasing tempo. Improvements to the F4U variant address canopy, framing and cockpit visibility. Landing procedures are standardized. Carrier qualification, once plagued by bouncing approaches and propeller strikes, improves steadily aboard ships such as USS Essex and USS Bunker Hill. The weakness that inspired ridicule has begun to vanish. May 6, 1943. 9:10 a.m. Over the Bismarck Sea. Lieutenant Ira Kepford leads a broad sweep ahead of a bomber formation targeting Rabaul's harbor facilities. His Corsair hums with steady power at 26,000 feet. Stay above 24,000, he reminds his squadron. Below, Japanese radar stations attempt to track incoming formations. Reports reach Rabaul too late. By the time Zero scramble, Corsairs already hold altitude advantage. Takahashi pushes his throttle fully forward during climb. The Sakai engine strains audibly. He can feel the aircraft fighting gravity. Altitude, 21,000, a wingman reports. Continue climbing, Takahashi orders. But above them, dark silhouettes glide easily. The first Corsair dives without warning. A Zero climbing near the rear of the formation is struck before it can even level off. The impact shears through the fuselage. The aircraft disintegrates in a burst of debris. Takahashi banks, sharply attempting to intercept the climbing American. The Corsair has already regained altitude. Force them down, Takahashi shouts. But forcing requires leverage, and leverage requires equal or superior position. The Corsairs choose their moments carefully. They ignore attempts to lure them into horizontal engagements. They refuse to descend into low-altitude turning fights unless numerical superiority is overwhelming. Each pass costs Japan another aircraft. On the harbor below, American dive bombers release payloads with precision. Explosions ripple along docked vessels. Anti-aircraft fire erupts upward, but the fighter cover is fragmented and reactive rather than commanding. In the operations bunker that evening, silence replaces argument. The doctrine of decisive engagement has failed. A senior officer says quietly. No one immediately contradicts him. The original plan assumed parity of aircraft performance. It assumed pilot experience advantage. It assumed limited American production capacity. Those assumptions crumble one by one. Fuel rationing orders are issued. Patrol frequency is reduced. Priority given to bomber escort only when critical. Avoid unnecessary engagement. Conserve resources. These phrases would have sounded defensive months ago. Now they are necessity. In a dim barracks, a young pilot studies a chalkboard diagram of Corsair attack patterns drawn by Sakai himself. Dive from sun. High-speed pass. Immediate climb. How do we counter? He asks softly. Sakai looks at the diagram for a long moment. We endure, he replies. But endurance without adaptation is erosion. Across the sea at Henderson Field, Kepford watches another Corsair land smoothly on the coral strip. The long nose dips slightly as the pilot executes a curved approach, refined through repetition. The once notorious landing problems that fueled Japanese mockery have become manageable quirks. The aircraft that was dismissed as flawed now launches from both land and carriers with increasing confidence. The collapse is not dramatic, it is incremental, operational. Japanese air patrol coverage shrinks. Bombers fly with thinner escorts. Pilots are ordered to disengage sooner. The sky above the Solomons, once contested fiercely, begins to tilt decisively. And deep within the bunker at Rabaul, Takahashi stares at the map and understands something irreversible. The original plan no longer functions. June 12, 1943. 5:40 a.m. Tobera Airfield near Rabaul. A pale grey dawn stretches over the jungle, the horizon barely visible through humid haze. Engines cough to life in staggered sequence along the dispersal strip. The sharp metallic rattle of starter carts echoes across the coral surface as ground crews hurry between aircraft. Parked at the far end of the field are several Kawanishi and one K-1 Shiden fighters, freshly delivered and still smelling faintly of factory paint beneath their camouflage. Their broader wings and heavier armament represent a deliberate attempt to counter the American advantage in firepower and speed. Commander Saburo Sakai walks slowly along the line of aircraft, running his gloved hand along the metal skin of one Shiden. 4 Type 99 Model 2 20mm cannons protrude from its wings. This will answer their guns, a maintenance officer says with forced optimism. Sakai does not reply immediately. Guns are not altitude, he says at last. Inside the operations hut, Captain Hiroshi Takahashi studies updated intelligence reports. American Corsair presence has expanded beyond Guadalcanal. Patrols now extend northward with increasing frequency. Reports confirm improved landing operations aboard British carriers in the Central Pacific. They are deploying from ships as well. A staff officer reports quietly. The landing problems have been addressed. Takahashi's jaw tightens. The early weakness that once justified dismissal is fading into irrelevance. June 12, 1943, 8:17 a.m. Over St. George's Channel. A Japanese strike group climbs toward rendezvous altitude, Shiden fighters leading Zeros trailing. The objective is bold. A concentrated attack on American positions near New Georgia, hoping to disrupt forward operations before further airfields are completed. Sakai flies point in a Shiden engine, roaring with more power than the Zero ever offered. The aircraft feels heavier, but steadier. He senses potential. Maintain tight formation, he orders. We strike decisively. Above 26,000 feet, dark shapes appear against the sun. Corsairs. Lieutenant Ira Kepford's squadron holds superior altitude once again. The American fighters fan outward, slightly maintaining disciplined spacing. They're climbing hard, one Corsair pilot reports. Let them, Kepford answers. We'll take them from the top. The dive begins. You can feel the compression in your chest as gravity and horsepower combine. The Corsairs descend in coordinated arcs, sunlight flashing off wings. Sakai pulls upward in response, attempting to meet them head-on with the Shiden's heavier cannons. The first exchange is brutal. Tracer lines intersect violently. One Corsair streaks through a curtain of Japanese cannon fire, but continues climbing engine unwavering. The Shiden that fired finds itself exposed during recovery. A second Corsair dives from above and tears through its fuselage with a concentrated burst. The heavier Japanese fighter spirals downward, smoke trailing. Sakai banks sharply, using the Shiden's improved roll rate to reposition. For a fleeting moment, he achieves firing position behind a climbing Corsair. He squeezes the trigger. The cannons thunder. Sparks flash along the Corsair's wing route. The American aircraft wavers, then continues climbing. Damage minimal, Kepford reports over the radio voice, steady. The Shiden's guns are powerful, but the Corsair's rugged construction absorbs punishment that would have shredded a Zero. Armor plating around the cockpit and self-sealing fuel tanks reduce catastrophic vulnerability. Below, Zeros attempt to engage trailing Corsairs in turning fights. For a brief instant, a Zero manages to pull inside a wide American turn and fire. The Corsair rolls sharply and dives away, accelerating beyond reach. Fuel consumption becomes critical again. The heavier Shiden burns fuel rapidly at combat power. Japanese pilots must choose between prolonged engagement and safe return. Break contact north, Sakai orders reluctantly. The strike mission dissolves. Bombers deprived of effective fighter superiority jettison payloads early and retreat. By noon, American forces report minor damage. Japanese losses mount once more. Back at Tobera Airfield, mechanics inspect returned Shiden fighters. Several show multiple .50 caliber impacts. One sits riddled with holes along the fuselage, its engine cowling shattered. Inside the hut, tension sharpens. We need more Shiden, a staff officer insists. More engines. More trained pilots, another adds bitterly. Takahashi studies production reports. Industrial capacity cannot match American output. Replacement pilots arrive with fewer flight hours, fewer combat exercises, shorter gunnery practice. The attempt to recover initiative through new equipment collides with logistical reality. Across the Pacific, Corsairs launch from carrier decks with growing confidence. The once problematic landing approach has been refined through curved patterns and improved visibility in the F4U variant. Deck crews move efficiently, launching aircraft in rapid succession. The machine, once mocked for its ungainly nose and difficult handling, now projects power from both land and sea. That evening, Sakai stands alone at the edge of the airfield. He watches the sunset reflect off damaged aircraft awaiting repair. The effort to regain control feels like grasping water. You sense it in his posture, in the silence that follows each casualty report. The attempt to recover what was already lost has begun to drain the last reserves of confidence, and the sky above the Pacific grows increasingly one-sided. August 1st, 1943. 7:03 a.m. Over Vela Gulf, northern Solomon Islands. Morning light spills across a calm, metallic sea. Wisps of cloud drift lazily at 15,000 feet, thin enough to offer no concealment. The air is cool at altitude, the horizon sharp and endless. Commander Saburo Sakai leads what remains of an experienced fighter element. His formation is smaller now, fewer veterans, more young faces. Engines hum steadily as Zeros and two remaining Shiden fighters climb in loose escort of a reconnaissance aircraft sent to monitor American movements near newly established airfields. Fuel reserves are carefully calculated. Patrol time is limited. Every minute at high power matters. Maintain 22,000 feet. Sakai orders quietly. He has learned to conserve. Below, American naval forces maneuver with growing confidence between island chains. Construction battalions expand airstrips rapidly. Forward positions appear almost overnight. Above 28,000 feet, Lieutenant Ira Kepford and a large Corsair formation patrol in layered groups. The aircraft are no longer rare or experimental. They are routine. Contacts below, climbing slow. A Corsair pilot reports. Kepford banks gently, keeping altitude advantage. He studies the smaller Japanese formation. Stay disciplined, he says. One pass at a time. You can sense the inevitability now. The Corsairs descend in staggered pairs, each dive deliberate. They do not rush, they do not overcommit. Sakai spots them instantly. They are above again, he says into the radio. There is no surprise in his voice, only recognition. The first Corsair flashes through the formation and fires. A young Japanese pilot in a Zero reacts too late. The burst slices through his fuselage. The aircraft snaps into a spin. The remaining fighters scatter. Sakai pulls into a steep defensive spiral, scanning for an opportunity. For a moment, a Corsair overshoots slightly during recovery. Sakai adjusts, anticipating a chance to engage. But the American wingman is already there. The covering Corsair dives in, forcing Sakai to break off his attempt. The coordination is seamless. Above them, more Corsairs circle calmly, altitude-preserved engines steady. They are not straining. They are not desperate. They are in control. One Shiden attempts a determined climb to challenge the upper layer. The pilot pushes his engine hard, nose pointed skyward. The Corsair element above waits. At the apex of the Shiden's climb, just as speed decays, two Corsairs drop in synchronized arcs. 8 machine guns converge. The Shiden erupts in fragments. Sakai feels the shift completely now. This is no longer a contest of skill alone. The Americans have integrated performance, tactics, numbers, and production into a unified force. He sees young Japanese pilots chasing briefly, then abandoning pursuit as fuel warnings blink. He sees Corsairs disengage effortlessly and reset for another dive. The fight continues for minutes that feel longer. 1-0 manages to slip behind a diving Corsair and fire. Tracers strike the American's wing. The Corsair rolls, dives, and accelerates away before sustained damage can occur. The Zero cannot follow. Eventually, Sakai calls it disengage west. His tone is steady, controlled. But inside the cockpit, you can feel the weight settling. The Corsairs do not pursue aggressively. They do not need to. They have already accomplished their purpose. As Sakai descends toward cloud cover, he glances upward one final time. The Americans remain above circling, dominant. Back at the airfield, casualty numbers are tallied quietly. Fewer aircraft returned than launched. The reconnaissance mission yielded little useful information. Inside the operations hut, Takahashi reads the report in silence. They hold altitude from the beginning, Sakai says simply. Takahashi nods. They choose engagement. They choose disengagement. We respond. The words hang in the stale air. For 2 years, the Imperial Japanese Navy Air Service believed superior maneuverability and elite training would preserve air dominance. They believed the early flaws of the Corsair confirmed American design arrogance. Now the evidence stands undeniable. The Corsair's speed dictates range. Its climb dictates altitude. Its firepower dictates lethality. Its improved carrier operations expand its reach. The realization is not dramatic. It is quiet. In the fading light outside, mechanics refuel surviving aircraft sparingly. Replacement pilots study engagement diagrams with uncertain eyes. And in the stillness of the hut, both Sakai and Takahashi understand something that cannot be undone. The sky no longer belongs to them. November 5th, 1943. 6:48 a.m. Rabaul Harbor, New Britain. The sky is overcast low and heavy with gray cloud that presses down over the harbor like a lid. The sea below is restless wind chopping the surface into short white crests. On the decks of anchored cruisers and destroyers, anti-aircraft crews stand at readiness beside Type 96 cannons and heavier 127mm dual-purpose guns. Radar operators inside dim compartments track approaching contacts. The reports come quickly now. Large formation, high altitude, multiple fighter elements. On the runway at Tobara Airfield, engines ignite in hurried succession. Zeros and a handful of Shiden fighters scramble into the gray morning wheels, lifting from coral as quickly as fuel calculations allow. Captain Hiroshi Takahashi climbs hard, scanning the cloud ceiling. Gain altitude. Do not allow them above us, he orders. But even as he speaks, shapes emerge through the overcast layer. Corsairs, dozens. They descend from above the cloud deck in disciplined waves, dark silhouettes against the gray. Behind them, dive bombers and torpedo aircraft approach in layered formations. Lieutenant Ira Kepford leads one Corsair element at 28,000 feet before initiating the first dive. His voice is steady over the radio. Clear the sky. The first pass is surgical. A Zero climbing beneath the cloud layer is struck before it levels off. The 8 Browning machine guns tear through its fuselage. It explodes against the gray backdrop, fragments vanishing into cloud. Takahashi banks sharply, attempting to reach the upper layer. His engine strains. The Sake roars at maximum output. A Corsair flashes past him in a blur of blue and silver, climbing again with effortless authority. You can hear the difference in engine tone. The deep thunder of the R2800 versus the sharper whine of the Sake. Power against strain. Japanese fighters attempt to regroup, but the Corsairs remain layered above them, always one tier higher. Every climb meets a diving response. Every attempt to gain position collapses under coordinated attack. Below, American dive bombers begin their runs. Explosions ripple across Rabaul Harbor. A cruiser shudders as bombs detonate along its deck. Smoke billows upward, mingling with low cloud. Takahashi sees a Shiden attempt to intercept a diving Corsair near the harbor. The Japanese fighter fires a burst of cannon rounds. Sparks flash along the Corsair's fuselage, but the American aircraft pulls through and climbs again. Moments later, a covering Corsair drops in behind the Shiden and fires. The heavier Japanese fighter disintegrates mid-air. Fuel warnings flicker in several cockpits. Prolonged, high-power climbs have drained reserves rapidly. Return to base, a wingman calls desperately. But there is little base left to protect. The harbor burns. Corsairs circle above the destruction, picking off isolated interceptors. They are not rushed, they are methodical. By mid-morning, Japanese air resistance has thinned to scattered aircraft retreating westward. Takahashi descends through smoke and cloud, landing hard on the damaged runway. As his aircraft rolls to a stop, distant explosions still echo across the harbor. He removes his gloves slowly inside the cockpit, staring straight ahead. Inside the operations bunker, casualty lists accumulate. Aircraft destroyed in air. Aircraft destroyed on ground. Ships damaged beyond immediate repair. Commander Saburo Sakai enters quietly, helmet under his arm. His expression is unreadable. They came from above the clouds, he says. Takahashi nods once and stayed above. Sakai adds. The early mockery of the bent wings feels distant now, almost absurd. The Corsair that once struggled with carrier landings now launches from decks across the Pacific. It arrives in numbers escorted by disciplined formations and backed by industrial capacity that replaces losses faster than Japan can calculate them. Pilot training programs shorten further as experienced aviators vanish. Fuel shortages limit flight hours. Replacement aircraft arrive too slowly. In the weeks that follow, Rabaul becomes increasingly isolated. American air superiority tightens around key positions. Convoys move under constant threat. Japanese fighter units are forced into defensive patterns, conserving fuel and avoiding unnecessary engagements. The collapse is not announced. It is experienced. In empty chairs at briefing tables, in silent rows of aircraft that will not return, in maps where red patrol arcs shrink and vanish. One evening, as the sun sinks behind smoke-stained clouds, Takahashi stands alone at the edge of the airfield. The runway bears scars from bomb craters hastily filled. Fewer aircraft sit ready for launch. He looks upward instinctively. The sky is quiet for now, but it no longer feels like his. The realization is complete. The Corsair was not a flawed experiment. It was a machine built for a war of altitude speed and sustained firepower. The early landing failures that inspired laughter were temporary obstacles. Once overcome, the aircraft unlocked a dominance that reshaped the Pacific Air War. By the time that truth was fully understood, the balance had shifted beyond recovery. Smoke drifts slowly across the darkening field. No speeches follow. No declarations, only consequences.